She starts to support the international workers of the world, the Wobblies, and in the labor movement. And I think this choice, because there's many ways in that period to get involved in socialism. And one of the things the IWW had going for it, it's very radical. First of all, they believe in a lot of direct action, wildcat strikes, things like this. But also they're definitely the most inclusive of like the socialist groupings of the time. And that was a big thing for her because she had no patience whatsoever for any kind of prejudice. And so any labor movement that would not include black workers, women workers, whatever, for whatever reason, she was not having it. This is not her revolution. This is not what she's fighting for.
You know what's crazy? Something I was thinking about, with all of her limitations and disadvantages and lack of senses, it fosters, while obviously this is a limitation, it's also a benefit in this way. It fosters a mindset where she is acutely aware of the fact that there's stuff she doesn't know. There's a built-in kind of humility. So there's known unknowns, and she's constantly prepared to learn more. While I think, while many of us, when we have all of our faculties and all of our senses, there's a bravado and an undue confidence that we get it. I can see this and that, and it's just an interesting way that our brains can develop, I think.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Like no matter how much she would learn, she would know instinctively that she doesn't know everything, just because she's dependent on other people to describe so many things that are happening around her every day, every minute. She's having to learn through another person all the time what's happening in the room around her, what's going on. And when it comes to, one of the things I was a little bit, I wanted to find more about, but it was really hard in the readings that I found, was like really her breakdown of race, like how she understood race growing up in a family that owned slaves before she was born, but growing up with black servants in the house, severely underpaid, mistreated black servants. And there's two things to point out about that. So the first was that her only friend when she was really young was Martha Washington, who was the daughter of the cook. And so obviously Helen's blind, so she can't perceive blackness visually, but she understood instinctively, even before she understood language. She understood she could get away with things with Martha. So she says, Martha understood my signs. And at that point, her signs are very basic. They're just kind of like, I want food. This is mine. Something, stuff like this. And she says, I seldom had difficulty in making Martha do everything I wished. It pleased me to domineer over her, and she generally submitted to my tyranny. So this is her writing in her 20s about her early years before she learned language. And so this is somebody who's feeling a lot of anger about her reality, and she's getting pleasure out of taking it out on somebody that she's been able to understand, even without seeing and hearing, that even without understanding the language, that she can get away with things with this. She doesn't even know the word black, but there's something about Martha that she knows she's above her on the hierarchy. She can...
Something about Martha, something about her family, something about the society, there's something here. Crazy.
Yeah. And there's a moment where, after they're able to talk now, at this point, once Helen has this ability to speak with Anne, where something happens and Helen's super angry at one of the servants named Viney, and Helen asks Anne to ask her mom to whip the servant. And Anne immediately goes on a hunger strike and a silent strike, and just refuses to speak to Helen, to be her pathway to the world, and refuses to eat. And you actually see Helen feeling Anne's plate, I'm reading the autobiography, and realizing that Anne's not eating, that she's going on hunger strike in protest of what this 8-year-old has said, or what she's asked for. And Anne would not eat or speak to Helen until she apologized to Viney for having said this. This is all happening with signs. So these are just like, this was what happened in the home. I think that that helped her develop this
I mean,
thing. Go ahead.
Talk about the privilege, the luck of having this particular teacher to teach those lessons, and not just mouth them or spell them out, but to like put them in practice, the values and power and standing up for something, and having her understand the ways that she's done something wrong. We can all benefit from some of that.
Yeah, and she definitely benefited
Early on.
because, you know, this was what prepared her to later on develop a long friendship with W.B. Du Bois, and the founder of the NAACP, and she actually contributed to his newspaper. And she once wrote in another essay, and I think this was like kind of one of the more. She didn't talk much about race and segregation. She made herself abundantly clear a few times, and then just had like no patience for it. It seems like it's just. And so she said, "This revolt has never slumbered within me since I begin to notice for myself how she's talking about black people, are degraded, and with which cold-blooded deliberation the keys of knowledge, self-reliance, and well-paid employment are taken from them." I think that's just an interesting list, you know, that they're being denied an appropriate education. This is somebody who has had education open up everything for her, and she's become aware that this is being denied, and this is like one of the greatest injustices. And I think this is one that is definitely applicable to today, where we see like one of the greatest inequalities in our world is about that overlaps with color is education, right? I think in terms of public education systems and stuff.
Absolutely. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. Self-reliance.
I mean, to me, and all of that can be traced back to just the early experiences, that we have when our brains are forming, our associations with love and respect and trust, and how we relate to our parents and other figures that are authority figures, and how they relate to us. If you don't get a proper grounding in that, it's crazy. And I think that's, I don't know what the percentages are. Some major percentage of our youth population today just simply will not be provided for as a foundational like premise for them to go forth and like live a fucking productive life. You know, I don't know. It's horrifying.
So she's way ahead of just like voting rights, and like she's not on the topic of the day. She's not like, oh, the topic of the day is voting rights and desegregation of schools. She's already at like, no, this is everything a human needs for dignity. Allyship. You know, what does it mean to be a good ally? And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
So this is someone who is participating in a struggle while not being of the group while not being directly harmed in the same way as the main group, right? Participating.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what I would call it. I mean, I would argue based on the work of James Baldwin that we're all affected by injustices. You know, like I always love that quote he has when he says, you know, he was talking about seeing the police officer in the South clubbing this woman at a nonviolent protest and saying, what's happening to this black woman is barbaric and it's horrible, but at some level what's happening inside the heart of that policeman is like as terrible. I don't know exactly what words he uses, you know, just to have him in a state where he can do something like this. Anyway, so just to say, I think when you remove injustices, life gets better for everybody.
Exactly.
And, but yeah, so on this point, it would be like to be a white person in solidarity with the Black liberation movement or Black Lives Matter.
You know, I think on there are a ton of things I could say that are practical things to do, like go to this website and speak, you know, but I think on a very fundamental level, it is to like engage in that conversation in a deep and serious way. That conversation thing I tried to touch on earlier about the volleys between, you know, honesty and empathy, over and over, to constantly go back to that, even though it's difficult and even though it'll probably be weird and there'll be things you won't understand, like necessarily, because you're an ally, you're outside of the experience, perhaps. So you're trying to listen and you're trying to understand, and you're sharing your information. And once you do that, I think, and you have some good partnership with the group, with the people in the group who can help and provide the honesty for you to grow from. like other things will come. You know, once you're really doing that, I think in a genuine way, like the practical application of a set of like things will go. So I think it's weird because, you know, as we're all kind of dealing with this current situation, we're trying to figure out how we should move in it. You know, sometimes you hear it's people's expression of people's desire to see allyship manifest in certain ways. So like, did the white person change their profile picture on Facebook into a black thing, you know? And that's an expression of allyship, but it's an expression. It's part of a much broader thing. Like, if you're looking for that, you may find that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're dealing with someone who's a genuine ally. That's a performance of a kind. And sometimes performance is part of it, you know, but it's
sometimes
not
it's the
all
first
of it,
step.
and
Sometimes it's I change my profile
it's the
picture and then I
first
try to
step.
live up
Yeah.
to it. It's like, okay, now I'm going to try and live
Exactly.
up to this profile picture of mine.
Exactly.
You know.
So so it's like when we try to understand who's who, and we try to like it's like we got to do both, and we've got to just, the real question isn't profile pictures or statements or whatever. It's like a continual conversation, and having someone really purposefully, consciously, deliberately walk towards that conversation and approach and say, I'm ready to learn, I'm ready to share and learn.
There was this article that a lot of white folks were sharing around that was like, whenever a black person is expressing something they've lived, the correct response is, I see you, I'm sorry, that must be awful, or that's awful. And that's what you're supposed to say. It's like a script or something, right? And then a bunch of people were posting it with writing, I see you, I'm sorry, that's awful. And while I get the spirit of what the article was trying to say, which is like, I just was imagining this like army of white people walking around just being like, I see you, I'm sorry, that's awful.
Exactly.
And it's like totally the opposite of what you're describing, which is like a very real attempt at vulnerability and empathy and sharing, you know, and like seeing eye to eye and stuff like that. So I just, there's like things are going in a lot of different directions.
That's hilarious. That's exactly right. But again, it's it's hard to measure that conversation from an external space watching, you know. It's just, so we try to find the points that we can determine as like indicators, and some of those are valid ways to try to understand, but it's, you know, but we're talking about something more.
But that's what I wanted. That's what
allyship is.
And that's why I wanted to do somebody today who I thought was a model, because I think you can learn a lot more by modeling a person than like trying to figure out how you're supposed to respond to every possible situation. You know, it's like try to like, and then be able to ask yourself, what would Helen Keller do? What would, you know, what would Jesus do? What would whatever? It's like,
Jesus do?
You know, I think like there's a lot more power in that. And I think it's a more complete and thorough way of becoming a better person. In general, than trying to figure out how I'm supposed to respond. Like, what's the right response in this situation? What am I supposed to say? Blah, 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 you know. So
yeah, exactly.